everybody. Here to talk about book 12. A few things about the coming weeks. Know that, when we do meet, we're going to talk about big things we're going to do in April and May. We're going to talk about persuasive writing. We're also going to talk about resumes. We'll be working on those in May and the rest of April. So book 12. Book 12 is the last of the flashbacks, right? So, essentially, Odysseus has been telling his story to the king and queen, and this is the last section right before he ends up with Calypso for those 7 years, right? So, and they already know about that. So, this is kind of the end of that story before they're going to help him get back to Ithaca. Right, so if you remember in book 11, he had promised one of his fallen sailors that they would go back, Elpenor, right, and go back and bury him properly, get his body and bury him properly on the island where Circe lives. So they go back. He spends one last night with Circe. Of course, she's not going to let him leave without spending the night with her. And they do what they're supposed to do. And when he's there, she warns him about things that he's going to run into in this journey. And again, what we learn in book 12 is that they can't get out of their own way. The men are going to make it difficult, and eventually the men are going to create the complete destruction of the ship, which leaves him with Calypso. So, the first thing are the sirens, right? So these nymphs that sing these beautiful songs that are very intoxicating, right? But you don't want to go to them. And so he puts wax in all of the men's ears so they can't hear. But she says, you should hear it, but strap you to the mast of the ship so that you can't escape. And as she had told him what happened, the sounds are so beautiful that he decides that he wants to, and they won't release him, right? But those sounds are so intoxicating that he wants to go to them, which he can't. So they pass the sirens without any issue, right? So now they have to navigate between two different things, right? The first thing would be Scylla, right? The six-headed monster who's supposed to eat one person for each of the heads, right? So that would be 6 people. The other is Charybdis, right? And Charybdis is this enormous whirlpool, right, that can kind of suck you in. So the problem that you're seeing here is that they have to try to be cognizant of both things, but you're going to get distracted by one. So when they're trying to avoid the whirlpool, right, the six-headed monster comes and eats 6 men, right? It was one or the other, right? And really, if you look at it, the whirlpool that could suck in your ship, or the six-headed monster that's going to eat your men, it unfortunately be better to have the six-headed monster eat the 6 men, and you move on. So then, let me go look at my notes here real quick, because I forget a couple of things here. So then they come to Thrinacia, right, the island of the sun. And they were supposed to avoid that at all costs. Right? He's like, we can't stop here, but it's getting dark, and the men are tired and hungry. And they say to Odysseus, don't you ever get tired or hungry, or, right? We just need to stop and make food that Circe gave us, right, and rest. And he says, fine. He says, you have to follow rules. So if we're going to do this, you cannot touch any of the livestock that are on this island, right? You cannot have any of that. So they stay there a while, and eventually they go through their food. And like we saw in previous chapters, right, previous books, Odysseus, when he falls asleep, bad things happen. And so essentially this is what happens. He falls into a deep sleep, which later he thinks is the gods kind of messing with him. And the men are like, well, we can do what we want. So they go and they kill some of the cows and eat them, and it did not go well, right? So the island goes crazy, right? They're really upset, and they're going to have to pay for what they've done. So when they get back on the water, Zeus creates this gigantic storm and destroys the ship completely and all of the men, right? And somehow Odysseus ends up with Calypso on her island, and that's kind of where we're back at it. So that's the end of book 12, and then when I talk about book 13, right, we'll see that essentially the job now is to get back to Ithaca, right, and the promise that they made to Odysseus to help him get back to to Ithaca. So that's the end of the flashbacks. And I think it pieces in a lot of questions that you might have had about how Odysseus got stuck there. And I think these chapters, even though they're flashbacks, are very interesting, right? Because we really learn about Greek mythology during those chapters more than any other part of the book, right? Because we see the interaction between gods and humans and the mistakes that humans make and the prices they pay for it, right? We learn a lot about human nature in books 9 through 12 and all of the mistakes that could have been avoided, but sometimes just are not avoidable, right? People are people, and they make stupid decisions sometimes without thinking it clearly. All right, I'll be back with book 13. Hope everybody is doing well. Talk to you soon.